happen. It is a delight to be here. I am indeed the proud father of 7 children, but mostly the lucky husband of an amazing woman by the name of Stephanie. When I speak at a lot of college campuses, I worked for an organization called Focus, Fellowship of Catholic University Students, for a number of years, and actually was just speaking for Focus yesterday down in Denver. And a lot of young men will come up to you and say, what's the secret to a good marriage? And I just say, it's very simple. Just marry up. Just marry up. It's worked for me. And so delighted to be here. Delighted to be with good friends. I've seen some faces I haven't seen in a long time. Nice to see you guys and former students. And so I've been asked to speak on Pope Francis and asked not to make it very long. The other thing is I just made a dear new friend tonight, Daffrey, over here at the table, and she said, you got to lose the sports coat. You're way overdressed. And then she coached me on you got to roll up the sleeves. Father, he doesn't do that, but you need to do that. So, okay. So I don't normally speak like this. I work in Washington, D.C. We wear ties when it's 107 degrees with 110% humidity, even though that's impossible. And so I'm just trying to get into the whole Aspen thing, all right? I'm trying to do the Denver thing. What would I like to do tonight? I've been asked to speak on Pope Francis, and I'll speak again tomorrow night. And so I want to do a thing in 2 parts. Tonight I'd like to speak about what I think is the essence of Pope Francis's vision, what he sees that the world needs right now, particularly from the Catholic Church, what I'm calling his social vision. And I'll make my case for why I think that's true. And then tomorrow night, I'm going to speak more to what that means for us. What does it mean for us to live that? What does it mean for us to, frankly, live what he has called the year of mercy? Tonight's about what he sees. Tomorrow's about us, okay? So that's how we'll do it. A little bit about me. So I've mainly, most of my career, when I haven't been chasing children around, was as an academic. I was a professor of history for a number of years, involved in academic administration of a number of institutions of higher education. And a number of years ago, I decided to leave that. I made the choice. I was president of a small school, and I decided I don't want to be this anymore because I felt a deep yearning to serve those who were more in need than I was. And the key to that, actually, I want to tell just a short piece of my biography of where that came from because it actually relates to Pope Francis. Because I grew up in Latin America. I grew up in Caracas, Venezuela, which if you're following the news now, please do keep Caracas in your prayers. I might be visiting it with the bishops in a couple months. Not sure it's safe enough to actually visit, but we might be going down there on a solidarity visit with the bishops. I was in 5th grade, going into 5th grade. We flew into Venezuela. My father is Mexican and worked for the car companies, General Motors, grew up in Michigan. And they were just launching what was called GM de Venezuela at the time. And we were heading down, and if you've ever been to Caracas, maybe you have, you land on the coast, and you have to get up into the valley. Caracas is in a valley, so you got to go through some mountains. And you usually arrive at night. That was back when Pan American Airlines still existed. And we flew in, and we went through the tunnels, and it's at night. And the whole family's going through, and you come out on the other side of this tunnel, and you're looking, and the mountainsides are just lit up. Picture night here with everything looking like ski slopes. It looked like Christmas trees all around you. Right? It was gorgeous, and I'm there, and the guide is there, and I said, that's amazing. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I'm just going into 5th grade. I said, why is it so beautiful? He said, just wait till the morning. So the next morning, you wake up, and you look out, the Hotel Anauco's looking out at the mountains, and the hills are covered with what they call shanty towns, or the barrio, or whatever, literally houses made against billboards, cardboard, corrugated iron, whatever. And I turned to the guide when I got to him, and I said, well, how do they get the electricity? And he said, well, they climb up the poles or find the cords. They cut in and they steal the electricity. They just run their own wires. And I said, well, isn't that dangerous? And he said, yeah. People die doing it all the time. And sometimes it's the boys who die because the boys have to go up and do that because the father has a job and so he's got an income, so the boy takes the risk. I told that story recently in D.C. at a gathering of the major faith-based philanthropic groups in D.C. And after I told it, a man my age, in tears, comes up to me. And I looked at him. I said, you're Venezuelan? He said, yeah, I'm from Venezuela. I lost my best friend that way. Now, as a 5th grader, there's a lot of things going on in your life, but that never left me. That's the kind of image that never leaves you. And so at a certain point in my life, I came back to it. I thought, Lord, I want to do something in this. I love being a professor. I love being the president of this small school. But I need to do something in this area. And you can imagine what it must be like for me, or maybe you can't, but it was a big deal for me when Pope Francis became Pope. When a Pope from Argentina, and don't tell any Latin Americans that the countries are all Latin America. They don't believe you, right? They're not. They're different. Believe me, they're different. And Venezuelans are famous for not speaking good Spanish, I've since learned from every other country I visited. What it meant, but there's also a certain kind of vision that comes out of Latin America that I want to speak from to hopefully help you understand a little bit about Pope Francis. Let me make this observation. I want to begin with what Pope Francis sees. Then I want to say what he wants us to do about it, how we deal with it in general. And we'll save specifics for tomorrow. What does Pope Francis see? At an interesting moment after he was made Pope, one of the big questions around him, and people don't remember this, I was in a room full of bishops, by the way, when he was made Pope. We were in a board meeting of a big international Catholic organization. And the announcement comes out, white smoke, white smoke. So they immediately, all the financials disappear from the screen, and television's on the screen now in the boardroom. Everyone turns off, and we're watching. And they announce this guy, Jorge Bergoglio, and it's dead silence because no one's ever heard of the guy, right? And then someone looks him up on the internet, starts saying, lives very simply, rides the bus, doesn't have a driver, lives in an apartment. Oh no, he says. No one knew who he was. And so there were questions around him. And one of the questions that came up, one of many, was how is he going to relate to these events that have since become famous, made famous by John Paul II, these things called World Youth Days. Because we were anticipating a World Youth Day in Brazil. And it was how he's going to relate to him. And the word on the street was he was ambiguous. Wasn't sure if they were just sort of shows. Were they really spiritual? Was Christ at the center? Wasn't sure. Well, he's since had such an amazing experience of it. He saw Christ. He loves them. And he connected with the youth in an unbelievable way. But he went down there, and I view this was early in his pontificate, and I view this as one of the moments in his pontificate when he sort of was just being frank with the whole world about this is what's going on. This is what I see. And he gave a set of talks to the bishops. And anyone who knows Pope Francis, he's most honest when he's talking to bishops, right? That's when he'll tell you what he really thinks. And he gave a speech to the bishops, which he began with a line that is actually part of a famous document in Latin America called Aparecida document, but long story for another time. He gave a speech to the bishops, and he said, was describing what was going on in the world. And I think this speech, he's since repeated these ideas, but this speech gives us a sense of what he thinks he needs to address. And if you'll forgive me a longish quote, I know it's an after-dinner speech, but forgive me just a longish quote from Pope Francis. He's speaking to the bishops of the Brazil. This is 2013. He says, a relentless process of globalization, an often uncontrolled process of urbanization have promised great things. Many people have been captivated by the potential of globalization, which of course does contain positive elements. Pope Francis is not a pessimist. There's good things here. But he wants us to see something, and this is what he says. He continues, but many also completely overlook its darker side. The loss of a sense of life's meaning, personal dissolution, a loss of the experience of belonging to any nest, that's an Italian word, whatsoever, subtle but relentless violence, the inner fragmentation and breakup of families, loneliness and abandonment, divisions, and the inability to love, to forgive, to understand. The inner poison which makes life a hell. The need for affection because of feelings of inadequacy and unhappiness. I work with a lot of young people. Need for affection. The failed attempt to find an answer in drugs, alcohol, and sex, which only become further prisons. The great sense of abandonment and solitude of not even belonging to oneself. What a line. Not even belonging to oneself. Which often results from this situation is simply too painful to hide. Pope Francis, we know, is not a pessimist, but he sees something. He sees a challenge and a problem. It's interesting to me to note that because I've been studying Catholic social teaching now for a number of years and working on this, both Mother Teresa, Pope Benedict have both said that the greatest poverty in the world is isolation, loneliness, having no friends, being cut off. And here's Pope Francis saying what he sees is a world in which, despite globalization, what's increasingly happening is people are being cut off, lonely, abandoned, forgotten. In Latin America, you can see this, and literally see it. In Latin America, the way that things are working right now in urbanization is people are coming in all over from the countryside trying to get into the major cities because it's their hope of getting a job. And what this means is that around every major city in Latin America are growing up what they call the shanty towns, where each new generation comes in and they start building, and they hope 10 years in to have cinder blocks, but they start with cardboard, right? And you can just literally, it's like rings on the life of a tree. You can see how the city's growing. And there are millions of people on the outside of these cities who nobody sees. They're invisible. What Pope Francis calls the forgotten ones. He calls a culture of exclusion. And what he means by that is there's a whole set of people who just don't count. They're not a part of the system. We don't see them. We don't pay attention. We know they're there, but we don't pay any attention to them. And I lived in Latin America. It's true. You just don't see the immense amount of poverty around you. You choose not to. And so there's all these people out there, and Pope Francis is saying they're completely isolated and alone. They're the forgotten ones. Who's going to go to the margins and actually engage these people? Who's going to see them as human beings? They're lonely, they're cut off. But it's not just the people on the fringe of the cities. It's people in our own families. It's people who've got plenty of material goods. It's people in the middle of our cities. I live in Washington, D.C. It's not that big. You walk, you climb on the metro, you're surrounded by people, and you can still be a complete stranger, completely alone. There's something going on, and we don't need to talk about why, that's for another day, in which people are increasingly isolated. In 1994, Mother Teresa came to the United States and gave her famous speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. It's been recorded and was a big, major moment. It was one of her first times in the United States, I believe. Might have been her first. And one of the things she did is she visited the homes for seniors, for poor seniors who her sisters had set up, and she hadn't seen these before. Now remember what Mother Teresa's doing, right? She's in the poorest part of the entire universe, literally taking thousands of people, thousands, off the streets who are dying on the streets, taking them into the home in Cali, which she had renamed after Our Lady, and helping them die with dignity. So she's seen immense poverty. So she comes to the United States. She goes to visit one of these homes, and she shared this at the prayer breakfast. And she went to these homes, and she walked in, and she said she was amazed. You know these places. She walked in through the glass doors at the front, and there was the room with the couches and the television and the nice reception desk where you welcome someone smiling there. And this is where the residents are supposed to sit, and wheelchairs or couches, however, and there's the TV going, and there's activities, and it's clean, and there's food. And she was saying, she was just, at first, just blown away. She said, this is amazing. Look at, everything's wonderful. We have nothing like this in India. And it's clean in that. And she said, but you know what she noticed? She noticed that the people sitting in that front room with the televisions and these various things weren't watching the television. They weren't talking to one another. They were looking at the glass door she just walked through. They were looking at the front door. And so she turned to her sister and said, why? And her sister said, it's always like this because they're waiting for a son or daughter to walk through the door. Because they know they're forgotten. And forgotten is the greatest pain. For all the technological attachment we have and for all the way we can travel, something is going on that Pope Francis is seeing, not just in cities around the South and Latin America, but in the culture in general, in which people are being forgotten and they're alone. They're excluded. They're invisible. We don't see them. Sometimes they're in our own families, if we're honest. And so what Pope Francis is seeing is this greatest poverty, and he's saying, this is what we need to heal. This is what we need to address. How do we address isolation? He has a word for this, and the word he uses is encounter. And his answer is, we will build a culture of encounter, or in Spanish, the word is encuentro. The Spanish word matters a little bit, because in Spanish, encuentro means something different than by what we mean by the word encounter. We use the word encounter. We can have an encounter with someone. It's usually something short, memorable but short. Could be bad. Had an encounter with someone on the drive-in. That's not good. Had an encounter with the bank teller. Had an encounter at the DMV. Always bad, right? Or I encountered someone, like I bumped into them. In Spanish, the word encuentro is a much richer word. Encuentro actually means something more like you've engaged someone in a way in which you've touched each other's humanity or something. You've looked in their eyes. There's a physical piece. There's something in which you've actually come together in a particular way. It's an encuentro. It's a different thing. And his call to us is to build a culture of encuentro. He uses this same language, and I'll quote him again, at World Youth Day, as the antidote, as the solution to the isolation. By the way, the isolation is real everywhere. I just want to point out it for those of you from around town. So, I ran Catholic Charities in Denver for a number of years, Archdiocese of Denver. So I was telling some others, I've never made it all the way up here to Aspen. I've only made it to Glenwood Springs, because I'd always visit Catholic Charities in Glenwood Springs. I couldn't go the extra hour. But now I'm here, and it's a wonderful place. So we're running one of the things we started in the Archdiocese of Denver, some of you know it, is something called Christ in the City. I started that out of Catholic Charities when I was running it. And the vision is to get college students to come into the city and be with the homeless. Because one of the things we knew, we run Samaritan House, which was one of the largest homeless shelters out here, and it's one of 5 that we ran in the Archdiocese of Denver. And slept something like 330 people a night. About 50 of those are children. Probably average age of 4, because we slept families in that. But one of the things that was a challenge is there were people who were homeless who wouldn't come to Samaritan House, because you couldn't get them in, you couldn't get them in the door. So we wanted something that'd go out to them. So we started something called Christ in the City. Kids from all over the country give up a year of college, come to Denver, live right downtown near, and accompany the homeless. Okay? And they actually spend all their time out on the streets. That's what they do, getting to know people. Down there at the park, out there in front of the Capitol, down there by the old, anyway. One of the things we do for training is we bring these college students in, and the first day you take them, a formerly homeless person was working with us back in the day. I'm still on the board, I'm not in the front lines on this anymore, but would take a tour and show you all the places in Denver that no one else sees. That no one else sees. And under the bridges where people live, down by the river where people live, all those places that you and I, we really probably only see, depending on what you do, I don't know who you are, but we really only see people at the exits ramps. But this is where they are, this homeless population. She takes them all through there. She said, at the end of the day, you come back and you talk about it. And this one young gal from Chicago is in the room, and she's sharing. She goes, oh my gosh, that just blew me away. What an experience. I had no idea you had so many homeless people in Denver. We don't have that in Chicago. Not her fault, y'all. Not her fault. She grew up separate, she was never in that world. A lot of our kids are like that. If you don't believe me, trust the sociologists. On the left, Robert Putnam. On the right, Charles Murray. It doesn't matter. Different solutions to the problem, but they both acknowledge we're not seeing people. There are invisible people all around us who are isolated and alone, who are not apart. They're excluded. And Pope Francis is telling us we need to go find them, because we need to build a culture of encuentro. So next move in my talk, what is a culture of encounter? What does he mean by this? Another speech. Not long after the World Youth Day speech. This is in Argentina. It's typical, there's a great feast day in Argentina, the Feast of St. Cajetan. He's a big deal. St. Cajetan's a big deal in Argentina. I don't know the reasons for that, but probably obvious. Cameron will tell me later. And they have this literally hundreds of thousands of people. They line up, they march. If you've ever been on a pilgrimage in Latin America, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands at least, if not 100,000 people come out. They last all day, 10, 15 hours on the street, going around. These are not people who came from the parishes. This is just a lot of people in Latin America who want to come out. They're Catholics. They want to do something penitential. So they're going to walk around and be on the streets, and they end at the basilica where the relics of St. Cajetan are, and the former archbishop, it gives a speech. He's now the Pope. So they actually Skyped him in for this one. So his face is on Skype. And if you're on a pilgrimage, one of the things that's going on in Venezuela or in Latin America is all along the side are people begging, right? They're asking for things. That's just what they do. And that's smart. Find guilty Catholics if you need to ask for money. And they're walking along, and he says at the end, when you came and you walked along, and someone asked you for money, did you look them in the eye? Did you reach out and did you touch them? Or did you just toss them some coins? Biblical image there, not a very pleasant one. Because if you didn't look them in the eye and you didn't touch their hand, you did not encounter them. We must build, we must create a culture of encounter. I want to share a story from Samaritan House that Father used to share when he first got there. Dear friend, Capuchin, who's there for many years, and he shared this story, and if some of you heard me share this, I apologize. So, Father, and he made this story public, so it's free to share. One of his first nights doing the overnight at Samaritan Shelter. I've explained Samaritan Shelter to you. If you don't know homeless shelters, they're their own ecosystem. They've got so much going on. You got a lot of people in there. It's a population you don't always know how they're going to act, so it's a pretty tense thing. And at night, you lock the doors, baby. 10 o'clock at night, locked, no one in, no one out, shut down. Well, this is a winter night, back when Father was very early being the chaplain in Samaritan House, and awful Denver night. The snow's coming, it's icy, it's one of those killer Denver nights, it's freezing. Samaritan House is always full. Every winter, Samaritan House is full. You can't sleep. People are sleeping where they're not supposed to tell me, the CEO, where they're sleeping people. That's a good idea. I don't want to know. They're sleeping all over. Don't open the door. He's first night. He's got a volunteer, first-year volunteer. A guy's only been there one time before with him. And you sit at the front desk, and at the front desk, there's a blue bench in front of the desk, and that's where everybody comes in. Everything starts at the blue bench. You sit at the desk, and it's from 10 o'clock on, you just pray nothing happens. And you just watch that clock, and the second hand sometimes goes backwards. You're like, come on, this needs to be over. Sure enough, 10 o'clock at night. Or he said 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that. Knock at the door. What do? Not allowed in, not allowed out, freezing cold night. I should go check. It's a glass door. Do I go look? He goes and looks, and someone's all wrapped up knocking. There's no room in the inn, but he can't not open the door. He opens the door, and a woman who eventually found out her name was Mary is there, and she's wrapped like someone trying to survive in an awful Denver night. All wrapped up. He said, look, typically like a person who's trying to survive on the street, except when I looked down, I noticed that she didn't have any shoes. And so she'd been walking the streets, clearly not quite all there, bloody feet, covered with snow, freezing, I'm just standing there. So he brings her in and he puts her on the blue bench, and he begins to do what any normal person would do, and he starts problem solving, right? Okay, who can I call? What hospital might have a bed? I don't have anywhere to sleep. Can I open the door that has the clothing in it, because you're not allowed to unlock the clothing door, but she needs shoes and socks, and da-da-da. He starts running through all the things he needs to do. He said, meanwhile, the assistant who was with him had walked into the other room, gotten a bowl, filled it with warm water, put a towel over his shoulder, came back, knelt down in front of her on the blue bench, and started washing her feet. They never saw Mary again after that night. But you know what? For one moment, Mary encountered someone. And for that moment, she knew she was a human being. She knew she wasn't alone. Some of my Christ in the City missionaries will tell me it's pretty typical that you'll start a conversation with a homeless person, and one of the things they'll say to you is, no one's actually spoken my name out loud in 6 months. I haven't heard my own name. How do we build a culture of encounter? Who are we paying attention to? Are we looking? Are we seeing? These are hard questions. They're hard questions for me. And they're hard questions for those closest to us. It's a great Mother Teresa line. When people would go and serve with Mother Teresa, it was typical that what would happen is they'd serve and they'd think, this is the greatest thing in the world. It's changed my life. I can't believe, I've never felt myself give myself away. Can I stay here? Can I change the world with you? What do I do? You know, she would often say, she'd say, go home and love your spouse. Go home and love your kids. Because love, encuentro, that giving of self, it starts at home. I love having 7 kids. It's the greatest thing in the world. My wife and I laugh. Every night we go to bed, we say, we're tired but happy. We're tired but happy. But not all days are ideal with 7 kids. Sometimes when I'm getting home from work, if half of them have clothes and the other half have eaten, it's been a good day, right? And whatever I do, I can't be critical, right? Because then I'll pay real bad, right? So I developed this habit when we were young, when the pain was the highest, when they were all young and the older ones weren't quite helping. You'd come home and every day it was just like you're outmanned, you're outgunned, your zone defense is failing, and you just sort of walk in, and I'd walk in from work and think, okay, here we go. And I would turn into evil Captain Von Trapp, right? And I'd walk in with my whistle in my mouth, and I'd think, all right, I got about 2 hours to get from right here to everyone in bed. And I'd start blowing that whistle, right? All right, you two, get that up. You guys start the dishes. That one little one's bathed. You grab her, you bathe her. I'm on this. What are you doing? Blow the whistle, march, right? And you get going, and in the middle of a chaos like that, you inevitably say something you regret later, which for me means promising my child I'm going to do something. So sure enough, the little one, 2 years old, grab it on your leg. Daddy, will you read me a book? No, not now. Will you read me one later? Sure. Now go away. Hadn't thought when I said it, but I committed. And meanwhile, what's in my head at this time as I'm blowing this whistle and being Mr. Efficient? What's in my head is a bowl of ice cream that's waiting for me. And I can hear angels singing as I envision it. And it's sitting in that freezer, and I just think, if I can just make it to the ice cream. And if it's a weekend, I'm thinking, if I can just make it to the glass of wine, right? So I'm just thinking, meanwhile, I'm like pointing, but all that's in my eyes is this goal. So sure enough, it's bedtime, you're this close. And the little girl looks up at you and says, Daddy, you promised you'd read. And my wife's in the room, so I can't renege, right? I can't make an excuse. She's looking at me. I'm like, of course, dear. And we sit down on the couch, and my wife leaves the room. And she pulled out a book. I remember this moment. She pulled out a book, Maisie Bakes a Cake. I don't know if you know Maisie, these little mice. I don't know if you guys, a little mouse thing. And we pulled this book out. She brings me Maisie Bakes a Cake, and I'm looking at this thing, and it must have had 8,000 pages. It was like Crime and Punishment plus War and Peace. And I'm looking at this going, how can it take this long for a mouse to make a cake? It can't. And you open it up, and it just feels like each page weighs 1,000 pounds. And you open it, Maisie wanted to make a cake. Oh, my goodness, kill me, right? And you turn to the next page, and it's like, she decided to think about the ingredients she might use to make that cake. Wife's not in the room. I'm looking around. My daughter's 2.5. Flip to the last page. It was delicious. She went to bed. Let's go. I'll never have that 5 minutes with my daughter ever again in my life. Ever. Do we have 5 minutes? Do we have 7? I've often heard it said that a parent is only as happy as their least happy child. 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. Can we build? Can we create? Can we construct? Can we take the time to make a culture of encounter? The opportunities for this are there. Pope Francis is brilliant at calling us on excuses. He says in Evangelii Gaudium, don't say you don't have time. Because sometimes an encounter can be 5 minutes. Sometimes it can be 2 minutes. I had a good friend, a guy who became a good friend, very successful businessman. And I'm deliberately trying to keep things very vague because I want to protect. Extremely successful. Who we were talking about this, and afterwards communicated with me about 4 months after, and said, as a result of hearing this vision of Pope Francis, I decided that every day I was going to have one encuentro. I was going to have one encounter. Instead of just having a transaction with someone. We have transactions all the time. That's okay. It's part of life. So you get stuff done. Transactions are in life. But instead of everything being a transaction, I was going to have one encounter with someone. And he said it changed his life. He said it completely changed his life. Because here's the great truth. And this is a great line from Dorothy Day, one of my heroes. That when we reach out to people who are in poverty, we're not saving them. They're saving us. They're saving us. The transformation's in us if we really encounter. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm probably talking to people who write checks in here and support things. I've spent my life begging for 501c3s, so keep writing those checks and double them, please. But also, have an encounter. Because it'll transform your life. This is the genius of the year of mercy. So many times when we hear about mercy, a lot of us, not all, but a lot of us, we think about mercy and we think of the Good Samaritan. And what do we think of the Good Samaritan? We think of the Good Samaritan and we envision ourselves in this story. And what are we thinking about? We're thinking about us as the Good Samaritan. Can I be the Good Samaritan? Can I be the one who reaches out? And what we forget is we're actually both the Good Samaritan and the person who's been beaten and robbed on the road. That we're both agents of mercy and in need of mercy. And it's precisely in giving mercy that we receive it, that we learn it. I'm going to tell you, start tomorrow with the story I want to bring in at this point. Pope Francis deliberately picked St. Francis' name. The title of my talk tomorrow is Two Francises. I want to connect the two. But what we're going to see tomorrow night is that the key to understanding St. Francis is actually showing mercy. Not being poor, not doing crazy things like taking all his clothes off and saying, my father's not my father and I'm going to live for God. Not rebuilding a church with his hands. Not cool moments when the Pope has prophetic visions and sees Pope Francis. The heart of St. Francis is mercy. And tomorrow night I'm going to begin with Francis's own account of his own life. Francis is on his dying bed, and his brothers ask him, write the testament of your life. So give me the last words you want for your brothers. Francis, you're leaving us. Give us your last words. I'll save it for tomorrow. But it's going to launch what we do. And it's what we're going to see is at the heart of it is mercy. So what does this mean for us? Can I make a few comments? We have in front of us a great opportunity, y'all, to build this culture of encounter. And I got to tell you, the world needs it. The world needs it. Some of us live great lives. Things are going great, but the world needs it. I have the privilege of serving the bishops. And one of the great things I get to do is fly all over the country and all over the world and see some of the places that are most in need of mercy. Material mercy. Of course, we know there's spiritual mercy, which is sometimes deeper. I work with a lot of college-age kids, and they're as isolated as ever. They're pretending all the time. Let me just give you a little aside. So many people pretend in our world. They're so frightened of being known. I mean, I'm not an old person who just hates technology, but I'm not convinced social media brings people together because a lot of times they're just faking. They're pretending. It's posing. I'm putting images of myself that aren't real. I was walking in D.C. on the mall. I like to do this occasionally and just sort of walk. It's a nice place to pray. Lord knows we need to pray for our country. Anyway, so you're walking on the mall, and I saw this family right in front of the Natural History Museum, and they were about to it was about to be a big family brawl. So I stopped because I thought this would be interesting to watch. Yeah, and everyone's yelling at each other, da da da. And finally, the mom pulls out the camera for the selfie, and man, when they took the picture, it was like a family having the greatest vacation they'd ever seen. It was smiles from ear to ear all across. And I thought, that's what they're going to post, and people are going to think that was the greatest vacation ever. And I know what's behind it. And this is what a lot of our young people are doing. They're posers. They're pretending. Because they're alone. They're in need of affection. They're dealing with their own insecurities. They're not sure what the purpose of their life is. They're wrestling with the meaning of life, all those things that Pope Francis listed. And they're hiding. They may have all the money in the world and be going to some of the best colleges in the world. I know. I visit some of these colleges. I get to speak at them. It doesn't matter. They too need mercy. And they need to show mercy because it'll change their lives. So our world's in need of it. Our world is fighting not only to be known and loved, but it's also fighting for hope. I would say, you want to know what I see the most in some of the most desolate areas I see, the saddest areas I see? I see all kinds of things. The saddest areas I see are the ones where there's no hope. A good friend of mine who works for me, a guy named Ralph. Ralph has seen more inner cities than, he's forgotten more than I've seen. Ralph is just an amazing guy. Well, right after Ferguson, when the faith community is looking for help, who do you call? You call Ralph. Ralph works for me at the USCCB. So Ralph's like, I got to go down to Ferguson. I'm go, man. So he goes down to Ferguson, and he's just sort of walking the streets in the middle of the craziness. And he's walking the streets, and he says, this young man runs into him carrying a car battery. And if you know Ralph, you'd get this. Ralph stops him. Hey, wait a minute. And the guy looks at him. And Ralph says, what are you doing? What are you doing? Yeah, I know that ain't your battery. You were on film. They're going to catch you. They will call it a felony because you will not be able to defend yourself. You will never go to school. With a felony, you will never have a job. You will never be able to have a family. You will never get out of here. The kid looks him straight in the eye and says, man, I don't have that already. I was recently at the reservation, Pine Ridge in South Dakota. And I've been in a lot of places that lack material goods. Actually, this particular reservation doesn't lack material goods. They have this brand new, beautiful building for youth. Swimming pool, basketball courts. 3 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, no one's in it. No one's in it. No one's using it. This is a hope problem. This is a hope problem. See, because the way we were made, and I promise I'll end soon, but I want to leave you with this thought. The way we were made is we were made for something great. Something greater from us. We've all been called. We've all been called to something. And part of our joy and our happiness comes from being called to do something great. And if we don't get to do that, or if we give up on that, the net result is sadness. The church has a word for this. They have this word that's called acedia or achadia. Dr. Lillis will spell it for you sometime. It's called the sadness that comes from turning away from the greatness to which we're called. I'll give you a little earthy example. 8th grade baseball, the height of my career. Summer ball, a little less competitive, only 7 innings, and all the girls come. It was awesome. I am indeed walking to the plate. I batted third. I was one of the best hitters on the team. Bottom of the 7th, 2 outs, bases loaded, down by 2 runs. It was made for me. As any typical kid, I'd been dreaming about moments like this every second of my life for the past 5 years. So I go up to the plate, and I am ready to smash this ball. So I'm walking up to the plate, and they switch pitchers, and they put this little short left-handed kid in who I had faced earlier in the summer, and I knew I couldn't hit his curve, and he knew I couldn't hit his curve. And Casey, I went from striding the earth to quivering like a chicken, right? And I got up to the bat, and what did I do? I watched 6 pitches go by, never swung the bat. And I got a walk. Brought a run in. We're running closer. Everyone's applauding. Good eye, good eye, good eye. My buddy, so they're thinking, he did it. Way to watch it, So then my buddy Todd gets up, swings at the first pitch, hits it to the warning track, gets caught. We lose. Todd walks away from that game angry. 5 more feet, we would have won. I walk away from that game, sad. Because I had a moment to go for something, and I didn't swing the bat. Every human being, you, me, every kid on any reservation, every kid in any city, every kid in Latin America, every adult has been made for greatness. We have been called by the God of the universe to be a part of his divine plan for the redemption of the whole world. And anytime we can't do that or we fall short of it, the net result for us is sadness. And so we have two duties in our culture of encounter. We need to meet people, and we need to help them have their opportunity to fulfill the greatness they were made for. And then the second part from Pope Francis for each of us, the second part from Pope Francis for each of us is our own happiness depends on whether we're going to swing the bat. And brothers and sisters, I don't know half your lives. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know where you live. I don't know what your situation is. But we're invited to build a culture of encounter, and it's going to cost, because love costs. It's going to be hard. It's going to take you out of your comfort zone. It's going to stretch you. It's going to mean going places you wouldn't normally go. It's going to mean being willing to lay yourself out there. It's going to be being willing to put stuff on the table you've been hiding your whole life. It's going to be willing to do all kinds of things that will cost you, because love is complete giving. As Mother Teresa said, there is no love without cost. But that's swinging the bat. And you can't be happy, and I can't be happy unless we love like that, unless we swing the bat. And I want to talk about what that might look for us more tomorrow. But for tonight, I just want to leave you with that. Swing the bat. Build a culture of encounter. Give your life for others. Do it. What a weird religion we have that actually says the way you gain your life is you lose it. But it's actually true. May God give us the grace to do it. Thanks.